Welcome to lesson number 9 of Mastering Positional Techniques, and today you see a topic on your screen: developing and activating pieces. And the first concept we're gonna look at is, where does the rook belong? So usually it's a good question, like you wanna bring your rooks to the center, and it really matters where you place them. In the following position, I want you to look at it and try to logically come down to conclusion. So basically, black are playing in the center. If we take a look, let's say at C file, there is nothing going on C file. There is nothing going on D file. Yes, we can potentially take a look in the future. Let's say 10 moves ahead, and imagine that D file might get opened after, let's say, D takes E5 and D takes E5. But the way that D takes E5, point is, it will never be played because white don't really want to give black beautiful C5 square. So we kinda got D8 and C8 options, and now we came down to E8. And now the question is, what rook can you actually move, and what rook would you rather move? And again, that's a very serious question, and I want you to answer this right now. So the point is, we potentially want our rook on F8 to support F7, F5 maneuver. So we understood that this rook is needed on F8. That means that now we can move our rook to E8. This rook on F8 supports F7, F5 plan. After F3, Queen E6, Knight C2, E takes E4, C takes E4, F5. White have huge problems with this E4 pawn. Now let's take a look at the second example. And this occurred in the game between Keller and Najdorf. And as you might actually see by looking at the pawn structure, Najdorf played Najdorf. So usually it's a good question here as well. We see a rook on A8. The problem, let's say specifically with this position, white potentially want to go A4, A5 at some point and get a lot of space advantage on the queen side. So usually if you move your rook to C8 right now, the problem with it will be that in the future you won't be able to play B5 because the pawn on A6 will be a huge weakness. So black played bishop E7, and after bishop E3 castle, A5. That's what's played. We don't move this rook to C8. There is again nothing going on D8, on E8. Those are useless squares, but C8 is something that we gotta consider. And now you gotta choose between two rooks. And as I said, if you move this rook to a C8, you won't be able to play B5. But B5 is a crucial move here, because after B5, you wanna take this pawn away. It takes B6, Knight B6, and then potentially create counterplay on the queen side. So, coming down to this conclusion, we don't move this rook to C8, we first play B5, and after A takes B6, Knight B6, King H1, we play rook FC8, and black got the initiative in this game. Now let's get to the concept number 2, the Rook Lift. The Rook Lift is another very important technique, and it occurs in many positions, in many openings. One that can come to my mind immediately is, in some Sicilian defense with white pieces, when you play, let's say, English attack, or you play something else, and you play like something along H3, G4, G5, then H4, and then your rook comes to H3, protecting the C3 knight. So those who are playing Sicilian defense will know what I mean, because rook on H3 will always protect C3 knight, and that's why you can go long castle and try to attack on the king side. Let's take a look at this position with black pieces. Very interesting position, and the Rook Lift maneuver starts by playing rook A7. We want to bring our rook to D7 and take the D file. White play B3, and after Knight E8, Bishop B2, F6, the next move will be Rook D7, and black took the control of this chess game, this bishop, and also we set up the barrier, the pawn barrier f65. I had it in my lessons before, so go check out. So, I mean, I think it's lesson 2 or 3. We analyzed this barriers f65 against the bishops, let's say on b2, or let's say the bishop on g2, c6 d5 maneuvers, or b7 c6 bishop barriers, pawn barriers. Now let's take a look at the second example. This one is again interesting example. We go a5 and perform so-called Rook Lift. So when you see this position for the first time, what first comes to mind is of course queen trade. But we also want to fight for the d file. If you take the queen on d1, then takes, and it's not really clear what you can do. The position is equal, yes, but white now have control over d file. Yes, you can go rook d8, but I believe it's just a slightly worse position. So in the starting position they play a5, and their idea is of course to take the d file by playing rook a6 and rook d6. Knight d5, knight d5, bishop d5, and now rook goes to a6 and d6 as well. Bishop b4, attacking the rook on e1, and after rook e2, rook d6, it turns out that, you know, white have some problems. Black have threatened c6, black wanna go bishop a6, their pieces are becoming slightly active, and they got a lot of initiative in this chess game. Now let's take a look at concept number 3. Transferring the knight to the center. I want you to take a look at this position and tell me what would be the best square for this knight on f6. And of course you would probably immediately say knight d4. So now the point is we just gotta deliver this knight to d4 square. But now we also have to protect this pawn on c5. Black played bishop f8, that by the way Fischer was playing against Portish, and after queen b3, trying to trade queens off the board, Fischer played knight h5, and his plan was of course to play knight g7, knight e6, and to place his knight on the d4 square. In the next example, Pillsbury was playing against an unknown guy. We don't know the name, but we know the Pillsbury's plan. So what would be the best square for the knight in this position? And specifically for this knight, because I mean this knight can go to the same square as well, but this c2 knight is actually pretty bad placed compared to the knight on f3. So white decided to go for knight a1, and they're going for knight b3, knight c5, and trying to create a square for the knight. One of the ideas here is to play a4, a5, and then place your knight to c5, so b6 wouldn't be possible. So black played b6 immediately, knight goes to b3, queen c8, a4, queen c7, a5, and after b5, white got a beautiful square for their c2 knight. And take a look at the starting position. Absolutely bad placed knight on the c2 square, and now it's very active. Yeah, it doesn't do a lot of work, but at least it puts some pressure on a6 and on e6 squares. Let's take a look at the next concept of this video. The next concept is so-called the Cloistered Bishop, and it refers to this bishop on d7 square as it blocked by its own light squares pawns. Black playing knight a5. Knight goes to e5, bishop e8. So in this cases, we wanted to retreat our bishop to maybe e8, maybe try to get some space for it. In this case, f6, bishop f7. In this case, it can support both sides. And also we're trying to push in the center. Rook h1, f6, knight goes back, knight c4, rook b1, queen a5. Taras was playing with black pieces, king d2, bishop f7, and black got better chances. The next example, Bunch was playing against Plachetka with black pieces. Once again, terrible bishop on c8, and also not so good bishop on e7, and now we reroute it and trying to attack e5 pawn. And in this case, once we take the e5 pawn, we potentially can activate this bishop as well, bishop h6, queen g4, bishop g7, trying to attack the pawn on e5, queen f4, a6, trying to go queen c7 so that knight cannot go to b5 and d6, h4, queen c7, and simply, as simple as that, white cannot protect e5 pawn, h5, knight e5, rook f1, bishop d7, h6, bishop h8, and even though it looks kind of passive, in the following position, black are strategically won, because white have no chances here. Yes, there is pin on f4 to c7, but it doesn't do much. Rook c8 is coming, and then we take the bishop on d3, or trying to go knight f7 and trade queens off the board. Strategically lost position for white pieces. Let's get to the next concept. A good square for the queen on the edge. Take a look at this position. Queen is not active and it needs to be on an active square to put some pressure on black pieces. Here, white played queen d2, and the idea is pretty simple. We want to bring our queen to a5 and put some extra pressure on a7 pawn, because this pawn will not be able to move because knight on b6 is hanging. Black got to d5, bishop e7, rook e7, and after queen a5, white got a slight edge. In the next example, we are looking from the black side. And again, same maneuver, almost same, but we kind of mirroring the colors, queen d7. The idea is our knight on c4 is putting some pressure on b2, and now we want to put extra pressure by playing queen a4 and putting a lot of pressure on a2. Bishop g3, performing so-called zigzag maneuver. Initially white played bishop g5, then they went bishop h4, bishop g3, trying to trade off this active bishop of the board. Bishop g3, h takes g3, and after queen a4, once again the position is equal, but this queen is very active. And now let's get to the last concept of this lesson. Hindering the opponent's development. Sometimes you want it to make harder for your opponent to develop in the opening. In this case, potentially white wanna go knight c3, play bishop g5, yes, and then play e4, strike in the center. In the following position, Alekhine played bishop b4 check. He wants to provoke c3 so that e4 would become very tough to actually be played on the board. White played bishop d2, and now instead of going for, he could go bishop e7, but again, now white spent a tempo, so Alekhine took, and after knight d2 castle, the position is equal, but he just wanted to provoke c3 to happen. Let's say knight c3 in the starting position. Yeah, white could play it, but c5 is slightly unpleasant. But after c3, bishop e7, this move is very hard to be played. Yes, they can go knight d2, but they also have to develop bishop right now. The position is equal, but you kind of want to make it slightly worse for white pieces. And now this example. This example is very interesting. So Geller was playing against Yusupov, legendary grandmaster, legendary coach. Look how bad this bishop on d3. It is terrible, and I don't want to. You could understand why. It's not movable anywhere. So here, once again, you won't potentially trade it off the board. And Geller played bishop b5. He wants this knight to go to c6, and that would be actually a great option for white, because after bishop c6 and takes, this bishop will go to a3, and they would have a lot of pressure on c5 pawn. Of course, Yusupov doesn't go for it and he plays a6, but once a6 is promoted, another thing that I discussed in the previous lessons is once this, rook pawn is pushed, you kind of weaken the nearest square, which is b6, and if h6, let's say, was to be played, g6 square is weak. So bishop goes back, and after knight c6, rook b1, how many people like to say, pawns cannot move backwards, because in this scenario, pawn on a7 and b6 would be a much better structure. But here, the damage was done, and despite the position being equal, let's say, why do something random in this specific case? Let's say one of the logical moves is bishop a3, knight c6, f4. Yes, still fine, but b6, and this bishop is not really good. While in the following case, you know, I have some pressure on the queen side potentially. Yeah, knight can go to a5, c4, but at least a7, b6 would be an absolute dream for black, but it's not, and now white still has a little bit of pressure. In the next lesson, I don't yet know what we're gonna take a look at. I believe it has something to do with, I'll actually tell you right now, something that has to do with diagonals. So I think it's gonna be an exciting lesson for a lot of you. And then we'll slowly be finishing the series, maybe take a look at more examples, maybe even from my own games. But that's it for today's episode. Let me know if I should make more. I'll see you in lesson number 10 next week. Bye bye.